Good evening and welcome to the Charter Township of Van Buren Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, June 22nd, 2022. Call the meeting to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Ellen?
Here.
Medina Atchison? Here. Callie Barr is excused. Sherry Budd?
Here.
Jeff Jar?
Here.
Brian Kelly?
Here. We have an agenda before us. I have a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Support. And a motion by Commissioner, support by Commissioner Cullen. Any comments or discussion regarding the motion? Seeing that none, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the agenda is approved. We have next on the agenda, approval of minutes from the regular meeting of June 8th, 2022. I have a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the meeting minutes of June 8th, 2022 as presented.
Support. I have a motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Cullen. Do we have any comments or discussion regarding the proposed minutes or the motion? None. All in favor to approve the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the minutes have been approved. Brings us up to our first item under new business this evening. It is discussion regarding Sumter Road Corridor Plan. I believe we have a presentation by you, Director Power.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Planning Commission. Good evening, everybody. Tonight, before you on your agenda, there are a few items pertaining to the Sumter Road Corridor efforts that we've been undergoing for the last year and a half. The first of which is, as the chair said, just a discussion on the overall plan document. And what I'd like to do at this point is just to give everybody an opportunity to get a brief update on some of the changes that have been made based on the feedback we received during the required 42-day review period that began in March, and some of the feedback that was driven by some of the more detailed commentary of the zoning ordinance discussion. And there really wasn't much that was changed. First and foremost, I don't have this really up on the screen. I can put it up on the screen. I have extra copies of the plan that maybe we can spread these out and just sift through them, and then whoever would like, I can leave a copy with you, and we can go with that. We can provide more copies after the meeting as well. But of course, this is available on the website. There were just a few changes with formatting, with some reference items regarding, there was a photograph of a business that's no longer existing in one part of the plan. There was a reference to the Fire Station 2 when the fire station on the south side of the township is Fire Station 1. So some minor comments like those. But more importantly, there were a couple of substantial changes made to the plan. One was that near the south end of this study area, near Bemis Road and Sumter Road, there is three parcels. One is on the northeast corner of that intersection, and then two are on the northwest corner. The property owner of the two parcels on the northwest corner has voluntarily indicated that he'd like those to remain residential. In this plan, they had been designated from a commercial, because they were commercially zoned, they were lumped in with what we were considering to be a possible mixed-use area with the anchor lot designation. But with the landowner not interested in anything mixed use there, we've reverted that, the L-shaped parcel around the corner as rural residential, so reverting that back to rural residential. There were a couple of naming choices with the lots that are being considered in the plan, where in the course of going over our zoning ordinance updates, the reference to landlocked parcels was not as apt as maybe a rear or a secondary parcel, because these are lots that, if they are, presumably in their growth over the years in this area, there would be a rear road that would provide some additional access to those properties. And then the idea is we don't want them to be landlocked. We don't want them to be landlocked without access. If they're going to be developed someday, they should really have access to them if anything's going to be built there. So if and when a road or access drive comes in, they would be referred to differently. So We've renamed those as rear lots in this plan. There have been new renderings provided for the 4 lot types, which are the anchor lots at those main intersections, the shallow frontage lots, the deep frontage lots, and the rear lots. So there are some new colored renderings of those. And there are, on the mobility plan, there are some dashed lines where perceived potential future roads will be, because it's important to distinguish future from imminent or existing. And so anything that's potential to be built in the future is a dashed line rather than a solid line. So these are relatively minor comments. I think I hit the main ones, but these are based on some of the feedback we've received over the life of the plan and the zoning ordinance discussion. And I just want to give everybody a chance to kind of flip through again. But at this point, along with the zoning ordinance discussion, we could move this into kind of a final action around the time that we have a hearing on the zoning ordinance discussion, so we could recommend the adoption of the plan to the board. Would anybody like me to put the plan on the screen and go over anything specific, or would you like more time to kind of just flip through and go through a summary? I guess this is kind of just an open format on this item until we'll go into the zoning ordinance next.
If, Director Power, if you want to bring it up on the screen, that would be great. We can.
Okay.
If we have any specific questions or anything from any of the board members, or we have somebody here, I'm guessing, is on this agenda item as well, that maybe have some questions that we get brought up.
But the new plan is dated June, and there's some revisions on this version that are kind of rough staff additions of some images that will be, everything will be kind of refined through the original document through our consultant. And I believe Adam with McKenna, I invited him kind of on the late end to attend remotely tonight, but we'll have him available for the full final review in about a month when we schedule the public hearing, potentially for the zoning ordinance amendments. But I'll get everybody off the screen here. So just as a kind of recap, you can see now that there's a designation of the 4 lot types on our table of contents. One of them is now the rear lot rather than the landlocked. Moving along through the plan, the introduction has remained the same. I'll try to get this more into into the specific updates. Here is the future land use map. Boundaries of the Sumter Road mixed use areas are still largely the same, but as I mentioned, there is an area near the south end of the project that is reverted back to a rural residential designation. Here's your anchor lot. As kind of a recap, this is going to be the most dynamic area in terms of where you might see the largest mix of uses and building types. This is an example of what the corner of Bemis and Hull may look like if there's sort of a farm-style building with maybe a commercial component to it. Maybe you have cottage industry on the other side of the road at that intersection, and then housing built up around that area. Here's one of the deep frontage lots that you can see where there might be a logical break in the uses that you have in the rears of those lots as opposed to the front. And this would be your typical lot on the west side of Sumter Road, kind of north of the Rulo subdivision. The shallow frontage lot, this image is still based off of the original rendering for this was based off of kind of a hypothetical model based on the Bell Point, the shopping center in the city of Belleville. So if that were to redevelop and kind of the redevelopment pattern was geared toward this plan, you'd see the buildings kind of moved up toward the front, the parking toward the rear. But of course, that site is a very specific example. It's a large site. So in most of the shallow frontage lots, you'd see a smaller development pattern with maybe your liner buildings and kind of a narrower lot footprint. But this gives a general idea, and it also shows that slip street or service road concept that might be built on the east side of the road on Sumter Road. And then finally, secondary lot or rear lot. Obviously, we still have to make some cleanup on the naming of these lots because we have, it's either going to be primary and secondary or frontage and rear. And we've decided, I think we're leaning toward the frontage and rear options for these lots that are adjacent to Sumter Road. And going to the regulating plan, this is the, if you look at the mixed use, everything that was in that mixed use category on the overall future land use map, this is how those different use patterns break out into the different lot types. We've taken the rural residential out as a lot type because that's really more of there are some recommendations in this plan about how rural residential growth should occur and how there should be open space preserved and buffering around residential development, but it's not really a part of the mixed use plan. It's kind of a different part of the plan. So we took those rural residential areas out of this image. And I skipped an important page. This is the mobility plan where you can see there's a lot of hypothetical in this display, but in the future there may be a service road or a slip street along the east side of Sumter Road. And then you might see extensions of Rulo or Bach someday, which would, again, provide access to some other lots to provide some development potential in the future, but it is very hypothetical. These are just the preferred grid pattern of those roads. So they're because they're hypothetical or theoretical at this point, they're shown with dashed lines. And that would be the summary of all the all the main changes we made based on the feedback we received. Although I realize there's one other one, which is that there's an important distinction. I'll bring us up to the one other page, and then I think I'm really done with this part of the discussion. But when you look at the deep frontage lots, remember that there's kind of a split in the building types that could be developed on those parcels because they're so deep, and there's a different function that the rear of those lots might have than the front. So there's a paragraph in here that kind of describes that. The front and rear designation in the table on this page are based on the relationship to the road providing frontage to the property. So if a rear access road is constructed in the future and a property is split such that there's access to Sumter Road on one side and one's got access on the rear access road, the front building types in this table would still be only the ones that you see on Sumter Road. There would not be you wouldn't effectively mirror and flip what you have. You wouldn't see these liner buildings and more of a commercial development pattern on the interior of these lots. You'd still see just those buildings out on Sumter Road, not in the back. So that's kind of an important distinction we thought we needed to make in the plan to just verify that you weren't going to see kind of a copy and paste of Sumter Road and new development patterns along a rear road. It's going to be a more confined and simplified building type that you see back there. I think that is all the summary comments of everything we got feedback on.
Thank you so much, Director Power. Do you have any questions or comments from the commissioners? Anything for Director Power? No? It looks really good, Director Power. It's coming along really well. We've come quite a long way with it, and a lot of hard work from everybody put into this. Do you have anybody from the audience that would like to speak to this agenda item this evening? No? Is there anybody that's logged in, Director Power?
I did not see anybody on there when I was up there. I'll check one more time and I'll adjust the microphone. There's nobody on the Zoom right now.
Okay, thank you so much. I know this kind of ties into agenda item number 2. Would you like to start that item? I think we have action items for both of those that are kind of tied together.
Yep, certainly. So I have all new sets of ordinances here, and that might be the best thing to do is just to hand these out. It's not, you've seen these. These are updated as recently as last night with just one additional change, but otherwise they were in your packets last week. But does anybody not have a printed set of ordinance amendments in front of them right now? I know Vidya and I would raise our hands because I know I made one for myself. Yeah, and I wanted to make sure everybody had these fresh so we could kind of talk through everything.
I have the ones that you printed out, the
Okay.
original packet.
Sherry, you want to just...
Yeah. Did you get one?
May 27th.
The version in email was.
So I wanted to just have a nice open meeting with little else in terms of action items on an agenda to go over kind of the full summary of the zoning ordinance amendments that have been written. And we'll want to have another pretty open agenda to have a hearing on this next. But before we scheduled a hearing, I wanted to have a chance to go over all the kind of the summary of the entire ordinance and then some of the proposed clarifications or changes since the last time we spoke. So the way that this is set up, when we last met on this topic in May, we either had these proposed amendments in front of us or they were there was content that we knew was coming based on our discussion. Now, since then, there are some additional comments or corrections or clarifications that I've noted in these little call-out boxes, which you can see are the, if you turn to, there's the table of permitted land uses. If you look at these kind of call-out boxes, you'll see the little red notes that I've applied since the last time we spoke. So I guess if it's all right with the commission, I'll go through and kind of just give a really quick overview of most of this, but when we hit a point where we have a new clarification or revision, we can touch on that, and then we can open this up to open discussion. Perhaps our planning consultant has some input, and everybody else can chime in as well. But I guess just starting with the definitions, whenever you have a land use in a zoning ordinance, it's good practice to have definitions that inform what exactly that is. There are now definitions included for a variety of items, including the just some of the more significant ones. The cottage or artisanal manufacturing includes many of the use types that are in a couple of the subcategories of light manufacturing, but these are specifically not intended for mass production, and there's a limited set of things that could be manufactured. We also include things like accessory dwelling unit, brew pub, microbrewery, some clarifications on the restaurant definitions, the small distiller, small winemaker, service road, which is described in our zoning ordinance, but is not defined very in depth, and some other items. There's the table of permitted uses, which even tonight, I can say there would be another call-out box based on a discussion we had at our last meeting, which is that gasoline service stations are now going to be a special land use presumably by the time this set is adopted. So we'll make sure to have, even though gasoline stations aren't even a permitted use in the Sumter Road Mixed Use District, to be clear, this table should accurately reflect what's current. So we'll make sure this table has the gasoline stations in the C1 and C2 district as special land uses. But you can see all the other uses in the Sumter Road Mixed Use District included here, as well as the Belleville Road Mixed Use District. One item that you can see, and I'm sorry I did not label the pages that I gave to you for discussion tonight, but if you look at the bottom of the footnotes for table 3.104, which is section 3.105, just to clarify, these footnotes were pulled from our other section that's the actual ordinance for the Sumter Road Mixed Use District. So a couple of the things that need to be clarified on this page are, because they don't have context, are that in footnote 3.105H, or excuse me, 3.105I5, what we're saying here is that commercial, educational, and institutional uses in the Sumter Road Mixed Use District are subject to the Greenbelt buffering requirements for C, C1, C2, FS, and OT districts, as described in section 10.103 of the zoning ordinance, which I've included also. And that is important. That's an important reference because that defines those edge requirements or buffering requirements between two different districts. So wherever you have a commercial use next to a residential use, you're going to have a higher buffer requirement than, say, a commercial use adjacent to a commercial use. So anything lumped in with those commercial, educational, institutional uses in this district will be subject to those C, C1, C2 buffering requirements. And then likewise in footnote 6, just clarifying that industrial uses in the SRMU zoning district are subject to the Greenbelt buffering requirements for M1 districts. So just a little bit of a clarification there. If you can move along to a few pages later, section 3.121. There's a footnote on, a really superscript on the commercial uses under the special land use category in that table, so 3.121C. Everywhere you see those superscripts, those go with a footnote at the bottom of the table. And what I note here is that the commercial uses, those uses should link to footnotes 3 and 5, not 2 and 5. And I'll just summarize what those are. Footnote 3 would relate to the proximity of commercial uses to residential properties. And footnote 5 would link back to that Greenbelt buffer requirement I just described. And in error, it just referred to footnote 2, which is not correct. So it should be footnote 3 and 5. Now, this might be the first discussion point I'd like to have with the Planning Commission tonight. Based on some feedback I received from Ms. Kazera, as well as, you know, the idea of that feedback kind of reflecting some of the other relationships between residential and commercial in this project. Note that on footnote 3, there are some terms in here that put some limits on the proximity of commercial uses to existing dwellings. And it's helpful to know some context here. The context is that along the west side of Sumter Road, adjacent to the Rulo subdivision, that's an area that's been planned for the lowest intensity commercial use over the years. And there are limits that go with that. So with the C district zoning that links to many of those properties, there are limits on items like outdoor dining, all the activities needing to be conducted indoors, there are only certain commercial uses that are allowed on those parcels. Now, we don't want to be overly restrictive in terms of what could be built here in the future, but we do want to be respectful of that kind of land use context that the people who live there are familiar with. Now, the way that we were working through this initially was that we said within 100 feet of an existing dwelling, buildings with commercial uses are subject to the regulations of section 3.110D, which are those required conditions of the C district. So essentially, if you build within 100 feet of one of the homes, in this example, it's one of the homes in the Rulo subdivision, but it could apply elsewhere, and you're building a commercial use, then it would be subject to those C district restrictions. Unless the Planning Commission finds that a modification from that requirement is justified due to the character of the surrounding land uses and the nature of the specific commercial use. There could be some flexibility in that. But one thing that I want to point out is, and there's been good discussion with Ms. Kazera about this, it is somewhat rare to regulate based on proximity to a structure as opposed to a lot line. There are examples of it, like with one example that comes to mind is the setback proximity from a cell tower. You'll have setback distances based on specifically locations in relation to structures, but that is kind of rare. The intent here originally was to make this based on existing structures because there are existing home sites that we may treat a little bit more sensitively than sites that are zoned residentially but not built on yet. But that's a discussion I'd like you to have. Is this something where, there is some flexibility built in here, but the idea is to be, I guess, cautious that we may want to just protect all residentially zoned parcels as opposed to parcels with an existing residential structure, and put some use restrictions on the commercial subject to some flexibility from the Planning Commission, but based on the district boundary versus the dwelling. And so I guess I'd open that point up to discussion because this is not a simple formatting change. This is more of a approach to the land use in these areas. And really the most stark area where this would apply, or the most obvious area where this would apply, is adjacent to those homes just north of Hull Road on the west side of Sumter Road.
Just as an input, there are other portions in the zoning ordinance where when there is an existing legal non-conforming residential use on a parcel, that means the residential use is existing for a long time, however, the property is neither zoned nor master planned for it in the future, the setback is from the district boundary rather than from the use. However, those provisions of the ordinance also have protection for existing residential dwellings in terms of green belts, screening, and other design elements of the site plan itself, rather than setbacks. An example that comes to mind is Ashley Capital's empty zoned properties on the west side of Haggerty. You have all the single-family homes that are all actually zoned M1. So the ordinance still has provisions of how to safeguard those homes by maintaining distance from the boundaries or adding significant green belts with tree plantings to protect those homes, and at the same time not recognizing the fact that they're existing legal non-conforming dwellings. So maybe a balance needs to be struck somewhere over there so that homeowners are protected while you're still allowing for viability of the commercial parcels, especially in an area where the parcels are much, much smaller that we're talking about.
Good feedback.
So Director Bauer, I have a question. So if we were looking at modifying that from existing dwelling to the residential zoning, would that be more consistent with the remainder of the ordinance to update it that way, or is it?
Yes.
Yes.
So then, I guess my feeling on it would be to try to make things more consistent across the board, make sure we have the protections for the residential homes that are already there. Maybe if we need to be a little more clear and put some directions as a reference to some of the other protections that are there, but it also still has underneath there the ability for planning to review some of the sites to make sure it's not limiting commercial use as long as it fits with the current lot.
Yes. I think we can have the setbacks be based consistent with what we require in all other portions of the township. So we are not treating this very differently. We will have it, but at the same time, we'll recognize the fact that these are smaller lots, so the distances might be closer, so there are additional protections for landscaping and protection. We can do that.
Wonderful. Anybody else have any comments on the request from Director Bauer?
Oh, no? Okay, all right.
I'd just like to see it be consistent across the ordinance, so we're not having individuals look at it and now we're shifting on how we're viewing our plans.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah,
Commissioner
I
Johnson.
agree that consistency with the rest of the document is important for sure, and I'd like to see that. It is a subtlety though, so if I looked a little confused when you were discussing it, what we're talking about is whether the boundary or the bordering distance is measured from the walls of the building or the property line. And it's not necessarily a choice between 100 feet from the building or 100 feet from the property line. It could be 100 feet from any pre-existing building or 50 feet from a property line, correct? You would have to come up with what the new number would be for a distance.
Yeah, well, the direction that I'm taking from this would be, okay, we have 100 feet written in this standard. So if you build a new building on those lots fronting Sumter Road, the building itself would have to now be 100 feet from a residential district, not existing residential structure. However, that's subject to some flexibility based on, like Ms. Christian was saying, exceptional buffering or other exceptional circumstances of what's being proposed. But it would be the idea that the building you build, like with distribution centers, and those standards are written based off of the location of dock doors on the building, for example. The building that you're building has to be 100 feet from a residential zoning district in order to be exempt from certain restrictions.
I think for the bulk of the document and in what we do in planning, it's better to have the distance be measured from the property line. The property line doesn't change very often.
Right.
The structure can change. You could be conformant one day and then your neighbor takes down his house and puts an addition on the house, legal conforming addition on the house, and suddenly the neighboring property is no longer strictly conforming due to a change that they did not make, that the neighbor made. And I think that's one of the reasons why we try to measure off of the property line. Property lines don't usually shift the way buildings do.
Yep.
I would direct for going for the boundary rather than the structure.
Very good, thank you.
Any other comments or questions on this item? No? Great. Thank you, Director Bauer.
You're welcome. So, if you move on to subsection F, as mentioned, we'll make sure there's a consistency with primary or secondary and frontage versus rear. The direction that we have been taking is that we'll go with frontage lots, and then those other lots that are not landlocked, they're going to be rear lots, not second. So frontage lots and rear lots, not primary lots and secondary lots. I'm seeing some nods, if that's the direction the planning commission's okay with, we'll make that uniform across both the plan and the zoning
I think it
ordinance.
sounds better.
That way you're not putting on a pedestal the ones that are on the road, right? And so, yeah, that makes sense. So front and rear. All right. We will do that. Thank you. So there's if you move on to subsection H, there's a matter of interpretation with the building types, and we haven't really had the mixed-use development on Belleville Road to kind of test the waters on this, and we certainly haven't on Sumter Road yet. So the ordinance as written is very prescriptive. There's not a lot of question as to what the different buildings are as they're described, but there could be a case where a property owner or developer would say that they have a certain type of building, and there's a discretion about what that building is, and that may lead to different uses being allowed in the building. So there is a clause in here at the end that says, the planning director's interpretation of a building type may be appealed via a written request for an appeal for architectural interpretation to the township's planning commission. The note that I put here would be, it may be appealed by the applicant or by other property owners sharing a common property line with the site. Now, one thing we'll have to make sure we get right on this is that we have to recognize that in a typical development scenario for a permitted use by right, there wouldn't necessarily be proactive notification to adjacent property owners. So there may be a situation where I, as the planning director, or whoever's the planning director, may interpret that a building is a certain type of building, and under this ordinance, it allows certain permitted uses by right. We don't want to be in a situation where after the fact, somebody is appealing that or disputing that, especially a adjoining property owner if they hadn't had a chance to review that. So there's a bit of enforceability and management practice that we have to make sure we have a good idea of when we write this, so that whoever's in the future in the driving seat, having to make those kinds of decisions, knows how to engage the neighbors that would be affected. So that's one thing we do have to work through. But as of right now, it's written that the planning director's interpretation of a building type may be appealed by the applicant or other property owners via a written request for an appeal for architectural interpretation by the township's planning commission. If we are opening this up to property owners, a good question for the planning commission is, would you want the ability of all the neighbors to appeal this within 300 feet?
No.
As you would have for a special land use? I'd like to hear Vidya's input on that.
It's a very good idea to allow for an appeal process, because every provision in the zoning ordinance should have the ability to be appealed, and if a judgment is in question. In this case, we are not talking about the impact of the use itself. You're talking about the impact of the architectural style, and the only people who are really going to be affected is those who are immediately abutting the property or sharing common property lines. Somebody living 300 feet away who might have multiple structures between them, to open it up to say, I'm just driving by, I don't like the way that building looks. And when you have smaller lots like this, 300 feet can result in a lot of people complaining about a building architecture or something. I think it's reasonable to allow for an appeal, but the appeal should be limited to those people who are truly impacted by it. This is not a use review. This is an architectural review. If it were use, yes, it should be appealable by all the people who are within 300 feet. But in this case, we are talking about those who are going to be looking at it every day. If you're living next to it and you have to see it, you should have the right to, have a say that that's really not meeting the architectural style. So I think the way you have suggested it, Director Power, is good. It should be by the applicant or other property owners who share a common property line with the site, people who immediately live next to it. That's my planning take on it.
I would agree. I think that's a great way to look at it, especially with it being architectural. I have a little issue with the word appealed. I don't know if we can change it to ask for like a review and have the board review the decision that way, because I don't think we're looking at it as a complete formal appeal process from the decision. I think more so it's unless we're trying to look at it that way. So it's just, I would look at it where the planning director would be making a decision, and then it would be brought up to the board to kind of confirm this is what we're looking at. I don't know if it's necessarily a full appeal like you're bringing it up to the BZA.
Yes, technically, an appeal of an administrative decision goes before the BZA. So in this case, you can say the planning director's determination of building style may be brought before the Planning Commission for clarification and final determination. You're right. The word interpretation automatically sort of implies it goes before the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Yes. Yes, Commissioner Jar.
If two property owners facing each other, across the street from each other from Sumter Road, have a disagreement, do they share a common property line if they're across the street from each other?
Technically, yeah, well, so
That's,
technically,
you're going to say that's situational.
it's kind of situational. The road is, rights of way are kind of like easements, and there technically is a legal description written to the center line. But in zoning language, maybe Vidya can give a different interpretation of that.
Technically, it is not. When you say common property line, a public right-of-way is a strip of land that is legally owned by another entity. So you're not really sharing the land. That said, when I was making my previous comment, when I said, people who have to look at it every day, I was thinking, what if I live across the street from that building? I don't like what I open my door and see every day. So I think we could wordsmith it better to see whose line of sight is impacted. Line of sight is a planning terminology that is used. As I was completing the previous sentence, I was thinking, if I don't live right next to them or back, but I open my front door and I'm looking at this every day.
Or if you're a kitty corner, you share maybe a corner. You don't share a line, maybe you touch at one point, but you're still the adjacent.
Maybe if the proposed
adjacent neighbor.
architecture impacts an adjacent or abutting property owner's line of sight, which means from any tangent where you can see it, not somebody who lives 3 doors down and cannot really see where your building is. Maybe we can wordsmith it better. Director Power and I can come up with some language that is more acceptable.
I think that's one of the reasons why our notification is done on a distance basis. You can just do a distance from the property line and that covers it, whether it's 300 feet or smaller. It needs more wordsmithing, I think. But I think it is important that we have the ability for the applicant to, let's not call it appeal, but to have a decision reviewed in the case of a disagreement between staff and the property owner. But a lot of what we do in planning and zoning is to protect other property owners, the rights of the other property owners, not just the applicant. So ensuring that there's a process where an adjacent, call it a concerned, a directly impacted owner could appeal, no, I'm not calling it appeal, but could have clarification on the building type. I think it's important for the fairness of the process that we have that sort of.
I think we could
outlet.
rely on existing ordinance language. As you were speaking, I remember, Director Power, when we review in newer subdivisions, when somebody comes up with an architectural detail for a building and the building structure has to be significantly different than its neighbors, we define neighbors as something that is across on the 2 sides and diagonal. The ordinance has that definition. So maybe we can pick up for consistency if we have used this comparison before over here also.
And that would be wonderful. I think that would accomplish
Yes.
accomplish the goal that I was looking for. The only other comment that I have on it is that I think that if we're going to have a ability to have what do we call it, clarification, that we may want to have some time frame placed on it. It wouldn't be appropriate to have someone come back for a clarification on the architectural type a year after the project is completed.
True.
There really should be a sunset on that ability to have it reviewed in that way. And I think that one of the reasons I was thinking along these lines is that, yeah, it's architectural, but because of this form-based code, the architectural designation of the building may impact the use that you can have in the building. So it is architectural, but it might be somewhat more than architectural. If someone says that that's a barn, I agree it's a barn, and no one else thinks it's a barn, maybe there are items in the code that are allowed that wouldn't be if that was actually a storefront. That's my concern there. So thanks, I'm glad I think we're on the right track.
Yep, that is a good point. The interpretation of a workshop versus a makerspace would, potentially open up different uses. Now, fortunately for this process, there are a lot of what we could call firewalls where special land uses are often triggered by many of the uses, and that's going to automatically trigger a public input process. One of the tasks in implementing this ordinance will be when there are no special land uses under consideration, but perhaps a building type distinguishes from allowing residential or allowing residential and commercial. That might be important for some of the neighbors to know, even if it does get processed as permitted by right in either case. So we'll just have to think about how to properly notice that and make sure the neighbors are aware, and maybe a lighter version of a public notice process. I think we can work through that. If the chair would like me to just go through.
Looks consistent.
I'll move to the regulating plan, which is subsection I. We will make sure this image is the same as what's in the plan document. This image is getting a little bit outdated, so we'll make sure that this is consistent with what is in that actual plan document. Moving into the Sumter Road Overlay District, I know we did not go very in-depth into this in the early discussions, but really a lot of this is based on a more common sense, stripped down application of some of the things that you'd see in the Belleville Road Overlay District, but also kind of tailored to Sumter Road. So it includes landscaping requirements, some other building design aspects that would have to be involved with developing along Sumter Road. There was a comment about the pedestrian scale of the buildings and being more pedestrian approachable than automotively oriented, and that reference we just removed because there wasn't really a concrete requirement that went with that. So that's on section 6.409. A2 was, we're going to strike that. Moving into, and this is kind of hard to track because there's so many subsections, but moving into subsection C3, you get into facades, windows, and doors. In many traditional downtown districts, you'll see a minimum glass requirement at the floor level of a building. But again, this is not a traditional downtown district by any means. It's again, a rural cohesive district that will have different building types that are far and wide, and some of them don't have the same needs as what you'd see in a traditional downtown. So having a 50% glass requirement at the street level would not be as vital, but we did want to note that where there is glass on the ground floor, it's good practice whenever you're encouraging people to be walking and this to be a pedestrian-friendly environment. You want those windows to be transparent and non-reflective, because opaque or reflective windows are more for security and they can be a little bit imposing to the public eye. So we'll just make sure the note is in there about transparent windows, but we'll strike the 50% requirement. It's just an erroneous reference to Belleville Road that we will strike. And you'll notice in this section, in the overlay district, there are some requirements that would apply, going back to that whole discussion of rural residential character. This is where some of that rural residential aesthetic gets teased out. Some of the requirements on buffering and the street pattern and the intersection of the streets along Sumter Road, even outside of that mixed-use district, there's this overlay district all the way down, up and down Sumter Road, all the way down to Bemis. And the regulations in this ordinance would make it more possible to meet the forms that you all sought in the planning process for residential growth in the area, not just mixed-use growth, where you have limits on dead-end streets, buffering requirements, and other features that kind of make sure this to incentivize growth in a certain way. So there weren't any other major comments the overlay district, and that really summarizes all the new items from the last time this was shared with the Planning Commission. So I guess with that, I would open it up to general discussion, and I would invite the Planning Commission to consider scheduling a public hearing for the whole ordinance, and of course, to take any public comment if there's any public comment tonight.
Thank you, Director Power. Yes, Ms. Krishnan.
Just have a suggestion to offer when we bring the ordinance back before you. Director Power, since the entire overlay district is brand new, maybe we can lose the underline under the text. Typically, we underline new text. In this case, the entire ordinance is new, so it might get too busy for the eyes to look at. Maybe we will just show new text added from here onwards in underlined text, so it's easier to read. I think with lots of underline, it looks very busy. It's probably not that busy, so. Helps.
I think that would help a lot as well.
Will do.
Any questions or comments from any of the commissioners? Any comments or questions from the public? Could you please step up? I hate to do that, but we can't. What we were discussing was shifting it from the distance from dwelling to looking at the property line, and then we also went over.
So we compared it to other portions of the township where we have similarly a non-residential use next to a residential use. So we said we'll keep the standards consistent in the new ordinance, just like it is elsewhere in the ordinance, in terms of buffering and protection required for existing single-family homes. It would.
So it would change if you have a home that's set inside of your property, it's going to expand the buffer that's required because you have the distance that you have to provide for in which there are restrictions for a mixed-use building gets greater because it's now based on your property line or your district boundary rather than based on your existing dwelling. Previously, it was based on the existing dwelling. So if your dwelling was 100 feet from a potential use, but the lot line was 50 feet from it, under the previous version of the ordinance, you could build something that was less restricted. Under the current version of this, now with it being within 50 feet of that district boundary, you're subject to those restrictions because it has to be 100 feet from the district boundary or the property boundary rather than from the dwelling. That's right. There is some flexibility that the Planning Commission has based on some, like the planner was saying, based on if there's exceptional buffering or other features that provide for a good use of the land and a potentially complementary use. But the basic standard is that now it's based on the property line. We just, I guess.
By all means, Director Bauer, if you'd like to try to clarify a little more.
Sure, yeah. So the idea with this district is that there should be some flexibility that the Planning Commission has based on circumstances. We might not know what the circumstances are, but there may be if somebody voluntarily wants to have a big open space or woodland that, or a screening wall or something that really provides some additional screening, and they have a use that maybe it's commercial, but it's a low impact commercial, that, you know, but it still falls outside of those restrictions on the C district. There may be cases where an appeal can be made that, or an interpretation can be made that there's those requirements can be loosened, but all else being equal, commercial uses within 100 feet of the district boundary, if they want to just build based on the basic standards, would have to be C commercial uses and subject to these restrictions. There's just some flexibility that we wanted to build into the ordinance. Yes, that's what those are there for.
All right. Any other questions or comments on this item? No? Are we ready to have this scheduled for public hearing? I think the next step's going to be a public hearing. We're going to do both items for it. Do we have an idea of when that would be before us, or what you're trying to get noticed for?
Yeah, the earliest date would be July 27th. That would be the earliest date. And what we're going to do is make sure that the up-to-date versions of both the plan and the ordinance are front and center on our website, where we have the Sumter Road information, and we'll give good notice to all the residents who have been part of this planning process.
And even though we're setting it for public hearing, the idea is that this will continue to remain open, continue to be able to be discussed in questions, because we're not voting to move it on yet. That's what we're getting, kind of moving forward to, correct?
Right, tonight we're not voting on it. It would be just that we want to potentially schedule the hearing. So of course, during the interim, while the hearing is, before the hearing occurs, there's plenty of room for additional comment from anybody from the public. At the meeting where the hearing occurs, the Planning Commission could decide to recommend this for approval, or if they wanted to kick it around further, they could. But the idea would be, let's get one other push for public comment, have the hearing, and then after that point, you can make a recommendation. But we are not making a recommendation tonight.
All right. Thank you so much, Director Power. All right, are we ready to have it scheduled for a public hearing? Yep. Do you want us to make a motion, Director Power?
That would be helpful, yeah, for both the plan and the ordinance, just so we make sure you're comfortable with us going ahead and scheduling that.
All right, thank you. All right. Anybody ready to make a motion regarding these two items?
Mr. Chair, I move that we direct staff to schedule the public hearing for the two documents at the next available meeting time. Will that do, Mr. Power?
That will do.
Support.
The motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Cullen. Any comments, discussion regarding the pending motion? As we have none, could we have a roll call, please?
Sherry Budd,
Yes.
Medina Atchison,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
Yes, and the motion passes.
Right.
Bring us up to item number 3. I believe the next couple agenda items are all updates for you, Director Power.
Yep, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 3 is just an update on a previous planning case. Coincidentally, this case is in the neighborhood of everything we're talking about tonight, and I didn't even really think of that when I put the agenda together with my staff. But the Planning Commission in March of 2021 reviewed a request for 2 5-acre irrigation ponds for agricultural purposes near the southeast corner of Hull Road and Sumter Road. And this project really had no overlap with the planning exercise we're going through right now. But I wanted to just provide an update on this because it has been a while and no activity has occurred yet. The way the ordinance for ponds is written in the township is that the Planning Commission has to review them, but the planning director has to actually issue the permit. once the permit is issued, there's a year after the start of construction that the work has to be done within. So this is really just an update that the work has not begun, but is anticipated to begin in July. The other aspect to this is that the Board of Trustees has to approve the excavation activity. And so there will have to be another review with the Board of Trustees. But this is really just an update that no work has occurred yet. We did hold a pre-construction meeting in October of 2021 with the soil erosion official from Wayne County. And so Wayne County is aware of this coming forward, and the roads office at Wayne County has been made aware as well. When this does occur, we'll be sure to re-notify the neighbors because it will be a pretty significant amount of excavation occurring on that parcel. And we want to make sure that everybody's aware of what's happening if they see some additional truck traffic on Hull Road and then south of Hull Road on Sumter, Martinsville, Rawsonville roads. So just more of an update that has not occurred yet, but we expect that will begin in July. And invite any questions, any concerns? All right. Would you like me to go to the next update, item number 4?
Yes. Thank you, Director Bauer.
You're welcome. So this update, by the way, I did not invite the representatives of these projects tonight, but I'm glad to invite them back or follow up with any questions you have for them. But we have another airport project breaking ground at the Willow Run Airport. This is the Ameristar jet charter company. They do, similar to some of the other companies we've seen come through in recent years, they have private jets, charter jets with private traffic, cargo, and what they're doing is relocating from what's called Hangar 1. They have my understanding from their letter, they have a space in Hangar 1, and they're building a new site on what's called Hangar 2, which is over on the west end of the Willow Run Airport, west of Coletta, almost to the boundary with Ypsilanti Township. And just as a reminder, with airport projects, the Wayne County Airport Authority has the primary site plan jurisdiction, but we do review what they propose to do in terms of making sure there's enough parking spaces and that these uses within the airport are set back sufficiently from E-course and Beck roads. Based on the location of this site, there really weren't many conditions left in this review when I wrote my last report. But I am glad to answer any questions you have about Ameristar Jet, and I will just summarize some of the comments that the fire marshal and I had. So my comments are, first of all, this is a roughly 21,712 square foot hangar building with hangar space, office space, and an operational area. It is reviewed by the Wayne County Airport Authority and Department of Public Services with Wayne County. So the stormwater design had to be approved through Wayne County and in coordination with the WCAA. The Willow Run Airport Authority Fire Marshal was responsible for access to the building and fire safety, so they had to review the building for compliance with their fire requirements. This is where the overlap gets a little bit complicated. Our building department still is the building permitting authority, though the airport does the site authority. So our department had to issue the permits for all the building and the building trades. This will be a hangar with fueled planes, so there were some special requirements they had in terms of the fire code and fire suppression. I'll get to the fire marshal's comments shortly here. There was a sign permit application that would need to be submitted for the signage on the walls, and that the building is not up yet to the point where they need signage, so that has not been done yet, but that would have to come through our office as well. And then finally, a permit for the sanitary sewer connection had to be obtained from our water department. prior to construction. I don't mention water because this is actually still in the Ypsilanti, what's called the Yucca water coverage area. So these boundaries get a little bit confusing, but we do handle the sanitary. We don't handle the water. And as of the fire marshal's last report in February, all fire hydrants needed to comply with township engineering standards. And there were some water supply issues, but they have been addressed. And there are some comments with regard to a security gate needing to be installed, a Knox gate needing to be provided to the fire department, and the width of the access road around the hangar being 30 feet wide. I believe these have all been addressed. I'll verify with the fire marshal. But this is just another imminent project at this point as the permits are being released. The next administrative update, if you'd like me to go into the next one.
Yes, Director Bauer, and does anybody from the board have any questions regarding item number 4? And number 5, please.
Okay, Arby's at 10940 Belleville Road had plans in place in June of 2019 to refresh the facade of their building and do some minor site improvements, including some landscaping. Then the pandemic hit, and there were some delays on the project, but there have been no substantial aspects of our zoning ordinance that have changed since that time. So what has occurred here is I looked at the old planning file. I agree that the scope of the review is still an administrative review. And you can see former Director Akers' comments in here about just some minor comments about the landscaping that are required. And there was a condition that the applicant should plant 24 shrubs in the landscaping area adjacent to the I-94 service drive. And I support that condition, so I'll check that with the final inspection of the construction project. If you look in your packets, you can see the rendering of the new proposed building. A lot of these fast food establishments are moving to more of a modern block aesthetic, but you can also see that there's a lot of brick on the facade and some good metal trim that coheres with the Belleville Road Overlay District. So staff is in support of the architectural changes and the proposed landscaping. Any questions on that one? Yes.
Is that restaurant in the Belleville Road Overlay District? Do they have their park bench? Aren't they supposed to have a park bench if they're in the? Sorry, let me rephrase that. Let me rephrase that question. Do the plans as presented match the constraints of a building in the Belleville Road Overlay District?
Does it have the public amenities that are required?
That's what I meant to ask. Thank you.
This was administratively reviewed, so I do not
Can't
have an idea.
Yeah, I'll give you a complete answer very soon because I have the plans here, and I'm sorry I just can't read that fine of print, but I will make sure that that's addressed prior to any final inspection on the site. Good point.
This one never came before Planning Commission because it was administratively reviewed in 2019, right? Okay, yeah. Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. And that's different from, for example, the Burger King that we reviewed last year. The Burger King had a second drive-through lane, which it changes the intensity of the traffic around the site. There's no change as significant as that on this site.
Any other questions or comments? Go on to number 6.
This one, I've given only a little bit of information on this one. This is an interim site plan, but what you're looking at here is the former Payless Shoe Store site, and I know some of the commissioners brought this site up in a meeting a few months ago. The Payless Shoes has obviously closed, and somebody bought the property, had done some renovation work on the interior to prepare it as just a general retail space similar to a Payless floor plate. And they've completed interior renovations. They've done some fire alarm upgrades, upgraded their restroom. And what they're doing now is bringing in Charchet. I'm going to botch the name, I'm sorry. There's a beauty supply store that is upsizing and moving to this location. So it should be a good use for the site. There's minimal site impacts with that kind of change of use. There was really no site design aspects, but looking at this plan, you can see some of the details. This site is kind of unique because it shares access with a house behind it. So, and of course, the plan is just this small excerpt at the back of your packet. But it's an existing site. They share access with the site behind it. They have built a new dumpster enclosure for their dumpster, and they've resurfaced the parking lot and patched some potholes in the parking lot. One of the things that I'll still be looking for them to do is come back and complete the double striping. We have the double striping on our parking spaces in Van Buren Township, but otherwise it's a very straightforward use. They've improved the building, and it's going to be a beauty supply store. So if anybody has any questions about that one, feel free to ask me as well.
Any questions from the board? Well, thank you so much for the updates, Director Power. I think that we are up to general discussion for this evening. Anybody have anything for general discussion? Commissioner Johnson.
Or did you hear back from Cobblestone Creek from our last meeting?
Yeah, we had their draft master deed bylaws, and we're working on the PRD documents. We don't have those, but I've had a discussion with the township attorney to just try to kind of corral all the information. So he's looking at the materials right now. Yep. We are trying to keep that moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Thinking about updates, have you heard anything back from General RV?
Camping World,
I'm sorry, Camping World.
okay, I knew what you meant. We have been following up, I would say, diligently, if not annoyingly, because I would like to try to keep their process moving forward as well. We'd certainly hate to see that. They've done a lot of work on the site already, but we've made clear the tabling conditions from the meeting. It's a May meeting, I believe. And we're just waiting on them to provide those submittals. I've heard from Melissa Nance, the representative of Camping World, that they are working on getting those submittals from Camping World Corporate. So we're just kind of in a holding pattern until then.
All right. Any other questions, comments, anything for general discussion? No? Any comments from the public? Anything for general discussion? No. All right. Yes, anything?
I'll check the Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jar. I seem to forget Zoom every time at the end.
We have Adam Cook from McKenna tuning in. He has no comments on the chat.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, so get a motion to adjourn the meeting this evening.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Motion by Commissioner Budd, support by Commissioner Cullen. All in favor to adjourn the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned. Great job, everybody. Thank you. A lot of data.
I was about to start explaining, and I was like, maybe it's the echo.
I realized when she